So this will mean less wars the more
Yeah, my,
expensive
my,
those
my
overnight
thesis
rates.
essentially is that as we move away from the dollar hegemony, things like unnecessary forever wars in exotic places become not it's not affordable. Like we're fighting this war called Operation Inherent Resolve that most Americans don't even know about, including me until recently. It's been active since 2014. It's a $10 billion war, and I mean we just I mean just it's in three countries. It's in Libya, Syria, Iraq. Like most Americans have no clue about this war. This stuff is impossible. This is only possible using this like exaggerated version of fiat money as a base layer of the financial system. So
Wow.
as we head to a world of um, higher inflation, higher interest rates over time, um, I think it's going to be interesting the way it shapes the world. I think America becomes probably less aggressive. I think that we build more industry at home, and that there's more promise for the people. And Bitcoin to me represents a lot of hope because if you go back to the 30s, I mean, FDR took gold away from Americans, like literally Executive Order 6102, as I'm sure many of your guests have mentioned. I mean, look,
Couldn't
like
own it, right?
they made it illegal and it wasn't legal again until the 70s. So when we had all this time of financial repression, like in World War II, for example, where they had yield curve controlled and basically like any dollar asset was just getting crushed because inflation was so much higher than interest rates. What was your option as an American? You couldn't go to gold, and gold was like obviously skyrocketed in value over those decades. In real terms, it ended up, if you look at it by the 70s, it was like it definitely wasn't $35 an ounce, man. It's hundreds of dollars an ounce by the time they really started lifting the restrictions on it.
So you
And a
look
lot
at
of gold people,
Bitcoin,
a lot of gold people say it's still repressed today. A lot of people say the real
right?
price of gold is much higher, right? So today it's different. Today they can't do that anymore. Today, if we enter this period of financial pressure, guess what? Americans are going to have access to Bitcoin, and so will everyone else in the world, and that gives me a lot of hope.
So let's talk about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a coincidence that Bitcoin is now so prevalent that it came about when it did, or was it born out of this financial need? Do you ever think about it and zoom out and think it could literally not be here, and then we wouldn't have this parallel world to observe this current world in? Or have you ever thought about that? And then your thoughts on Bitcoin, also from a human rights perspective, and how it's like evolved with you.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have our world and we live in this potential world. I mean, we there might be parallel worlds. But I think that Bitcoin was almost inevitable because if you look at the way it was designed, and I have a chapter in the book on its sort of prehistory and where it came from, people knew that the digitization of society would lead to a government overreach and surveillance and control. And this was predicted back in the 70s, 80s. There's books written in the 80s about the rise of the computer state. And, at the time there were two, let's say, camps of how do we deal with this? Like, we know there's going to be overreach when stuff starts to get digital. Governments can basically do and execute their dreams much easier. Like, think about what Mao had. Mao would kill to have the technology that Xi Jinping has, today. Just think about that, right? In terms of surveillance, social engineering, DNA profiling, all that stuff. He didn't have that. He had to do it all with brute force. So if you think about it, what we kind of have here is two strategies. One is begging the government, basically lobbying, saying, please don't take our rights away, give us our rights. So there's another camp of people who said that's not going to work. And that first strategy is still the popular one. Like, people are like, how do we prevent Facebook from violating our rights or whatever? Let's get the US government to regulate them. That's still the dominant worldview, is that we should get the government to fix the problem. The problem I have with that strategy, of course, is number one, most people live under an authoritarian regime. So you're not going to get the government
Right.
to do anything. Like, if you live in China, this is not going to happen. So that's a privilege you have of living in a democracy. Maybe it's possible. Obviously, in the United States, we've seen that our government is not interested in respecting civil liberties of our citizens. Look at all the revelations of Snowden. Like, it's crazy. They were surveilling on us in a mass way, totally warrantless wiretapping, all that stuff, in collaboration with companies like all the telecoms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that, like, please government, don't violate our rights thing, it didn't work out. So there were activists in the 70s and 80s and 90s called cypherpunks. And they came up with a different model of seize your rights with open source code, basically make it impossible for them to violate your rights and ask for um, forgiveness, not permission. And that's the Bitcoin way, because that's where Bitcoin came from. The first wave of cypherpunks focused on free speech on the internet, on privacy on the internet, and the kind of consumer level app that was launched off 2 decades of research was PGP in the early 90s by Phil Zimmerman. And he came under a lot of pressure. I mean, Senator Biden, President Clinton, all Attorney General, everybody was going after him. They were saying encryption was for pedophiles and terrorists. Same thing people say, and criminals, same thing people say about Bitcoin today. And they were saying, we can't have privacy for Americans. We need a backdoor. We need a clipper chip. We need like a way in. Well, you know what? They were defeated by cypherpunks, by businesses, by an alliance of people, and for the better. And it's crazy, the cultural shift today. You have people like Michael Hayden, who was chief spook during 9/11. He's saying encryption is a right, a human right for all Americans. So we've gone this incredible cultural shift, and I would say encryption is more or less won. I mean, there's still threats, but it's been standardized in society. It seems like unlikely that we go backwards from that. I know that the Brits were trying to have a third key into a peer-to-peer chat and things like that. And we'll always have that pressure, but Signal's pretty dominant now as an upgrade for mobile phones, on the PGP technology. And I think it's just becoming more part of our lives. But that was their first achievement, was making sure that you and I could communicate privately on the internet, which was huge.